Hey, what's up guys? In this video, we're going to learn how to store data and retrieve it from Firebase in our Reframe project. So that sounds pretty cool. Let's get started.
Cool, yeah.
So I'm working off a project I made in my previous video. The link to that is in the description below. So the first thing I want to do is just start my REPL. So I'm going to use Culver and start a project REPL. I'm going to connect to Shadow CLJS, select the app build. Cool. And this is the project. Let's close this. I want to go to our views and I want to just create what this is going to look like. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to have a list of food items. We're going to be able to add to that list of food items, and that is going to be persisted on Firebase. So first thing I want to do is create a component where we can list food items. So I'm going to define a component here. I'm going to call it food list. And I'm going to create a let binding, and right now I'm just going to hard code the data. So we'll have our foods here, and let's say apples and oats. And here we want to just render out some hiccups. So it'll be a UL element, and we're going to map over those foods. And we're going to just return each food item as an LI element. So we'll run a function, we'll get our food, and we'll just return an LI element with the name of the food, and we'll give it the key, and the key will just be the food name. Cool, let's save that, and we'll just add it. Let's add it here under inside of our main div. So we'll just add it to the end of that, and we can render it with square brackets. So that'll be food list. Save that, and if we go back, cool, we have our food list here. Now what I want to do is create an input where we can, well actually before we do that, let's retrieve this data. Instead of hard coding it, let's retrieve it from our database, so from our Reframe database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new key here. I'm going to call it food items, and it's going to be a blank vector for now. Actually no, I'm going to hard code these here. So oats, and let's say bananas, B-A-N-A-N-A-S, yep. Cool, and I want to fetch that as a subscription. So by using reframe, subscribe, and then we don't have the subscription yet, but we'll add it. So it'll just be like subs, foods. Cool. So let's go to our subs namespace, and under user loading, let's just copy this, and we'll create a new key here, and we'll call it foods. And we'll just retrieve the foods from our DB, save this. Now this is gonna fail because, like I said before, we have to dereference our values that we get from Reframe. So we can just dereference that here. If we save this, we're gonna have nothing because we just have to refresh to get that new database. And we still have nothing, and we probably got ourselves a console error. No. Let's see what's going on. So we're getting our foods, we're subbing to foods, and it's because we're using the wrong, we're using the wrong key. So let's do that, come back here, and yeah, we're rendering out our list. Awesome. So now let's create an input where we can add items to this list. So let's go back to views, and I'm gonna create a new component here. I'm gonna define it, I'm gonna call it food input, and I just wanna return a div with an input field. So an input, and the type here will be, let's just scroll down a bit, type will be text, and let's have a placeholder of, I don't know, enter food, and then, yep, for now that should be okay. And then I want a button underneath this. I think it'll be placed alongside a button. And the button will just say, let's say food. And we'll just have no attributes for now, but we're going to add an onPick handler just now, and we also want to add an onChange handler for our input. So let's just go back, make sure it's here. It's not there because we have to add it to our main panel. So above food list, let's just add food input. Let's go back. Cool, and we have our food input. Awesome. So let's go back here, and now basically want to handle the onChange event of this food input. So we can run onChange, and this event handler is going to work like, if you're familiar with React, it works very similar. So we'll take a function, it'll get an event, and we want to, off of that event, get from the target its value. So let's just console log this to show you what we got. So we can go console.log JS console.log, and if we go back here, let's just clear this out, enter food, we can see that we're getting the value from this input. This is essentially the same as going e.target.value. So now, instead of logging this out, I actually want to dispatch a reframe event which stores this in our reframe DB. So we'll go reframe dispatch, and this will be part of an event. It'll be the second argument, and let's call it food from our events namespace, which I don't think we're importing. Let's import it here. So we got our subs namespace, but let's import from our events namespace. Events, and we'll import, okay, we don't, let's say set food input, and let's go to our events namespace. So we can go here and let's create that. So I'm just going to copy our previous set user event, and it's going to work very similar. So we're not going to use the event name, but we are going to use the value here. So here, instead of setting user, we'll set food input, and we'll associate food input with our value. And we can also just initialize this food input as like a blank string. Save this, go back to our views. So now we should actually be able to see this update in Refrisk. We go back here and we pull out Refrisk. Cool, let's just refresh so we get that initial value of a blank string. And here's our food input. So if we type in here, it updates. Cool, and we can see that event being dispatched here. So let's minimize that. Now let's make a way where we can add this to our list of existing food items. So here on the onClick handler of this button, I want to fire off a function. I'm just going to make it an anonymous function, and we don't need all these brackets. And here we want to run reframe, and we're going to dispatch, and this is also going to be an event. So from our events, we'll say add food item, and we don't need to pass through a food item because we're just going to get it from our database where it's being set. So let's go underneath set food item, and we'll create a new event called add food item. We don't need any of this, so we can actually get rid of this and just put an underscore here, and we'll associate food input with blank, so it'll reset that. So right now we can see if that works. Save food item. It doesn't. That's because we're not actually associating the value of this input with what the input is. So let's make sure that when we update this value, we use that value. So the value of this will be a reframe subscription, subscribe, and we are going to subscribe to food input. Subscribe, so subs / food input. We don't have the subscription, so let's make it. We can just go to our subs namespace, and here we'll create a food input subscription, and it will just return us the food input field from our database. Go back to our views, and we also want to dereference this. Save this, and this should work. Yeah, cool. Now we want to actually add that item to our food list. So let's go back to events, and let's make like a new food list. So we'll create a let binding, and we'll say new food list. That will be populated in our database. So we'll say food, what did I call it? Oh man, I need to remember these things. Food items. Food items will be associated to our new food list. And what we really want to do with our new food list is we want to add this food input value to the end of our existing food items list. So we can use conjoin, and we'll get our food items from our database. And then we want to get the food input from our database. And we also want this assoc to be inside of the select binding. And that's it. So essentially what this is going to do is, let's say we conj and we had apples and we wanted to add banana. Then our food input would be something like banana, and our food items would be a vector, let's say it contained apples. If we evaluate this, then we get apples with banana. Awesome. So let's save this, and this should work. Let's just neaten it up a little bit here. Go to views. I think it'll work. Let's type something in, save it. Yep. And now we're storing stuff to our Reframe database. But of course, if we refresh this app, none of our state is persisted. So what I want to do is persist this data in Firebase and then fetch it from Firebase when we're working with it. So the first thing I want to do is go to our Reframe project in Firebase, and I want to add the Firestore database to it. So let's set this up. It's really simple. We just need to create a database. Cool. Go next. And I'm going to start this in test mode. I'm not going to look at the Firebase store rules in this video. Now it's provisioning Cloud Store. Let's just carry on from here. So I'm going to go back to our project, and I'm going to go to Firebase, and I'm going to create a new file here called db.cljs. And in this file, we're going to be working with storing, updating, and retrieving documents that we store in Firebase. But before we can work with Firebase, as like the Firestore in Firebase, we actually need to initialize our Firestore. So to do that, I'm going to be using the new light module in the Firebase package. So Firebase, Firestore, light. Include this as Firestore. And just above all state change, this is where I want to initialize our Firestore. So to do that, we just need to call Firestore initialize Firestore. And this takes in our Firebase application. So instead of running get apps, we can just call get app, and this will initialize Firestore for us. So let's refresh our application to make sure that works. Cool. Initialize Firebase. We can even print line here, initialize Firestore. Spell it nicely. So if we refresh, initialize Firebase, initialize Firestore, no errors. Cool. Then what I want to do is go and let's go to DB and let's require the same package. So let's go up here and require this package. And now we can make a function which will allow us to create a document. So I'm going to define store doc. And right now it's not going to take any arguments. Oh, actually, let's make it take some data. So we'll call Firestore set doc, and this is going to set a document for us. And we need a Firestore document to set. So let's create that here. Firestore doc, that's the function. And this needs to take an instance of our Firestore as well as a path on where to save it. So we can go Firestore get Firestore and a path on where to save. So let's just actually also pass through this path. And the path is like we'll have a collection of users, and the user ID will be 1, and it will store this data to there. And we'll see that now. So let's also pass through this data, but this data has to be JavaScript, so we can run CLJS to JS, and that will convert our Clojure map into a JavaScript object. And this is not CLJS, it's actually just CLJ. Let's evaluate this and let's test if it works. So we can run comment and let's store, instead of hard coding the path here, let's just use the path that we pass in, so path, and let's run store doc, and the path will be users1, and we'll just pass through test data, and let's evaluate this, and we get a promise back. Let's see, we don't get any errors here. Let's see if we have any data in our Firestore. Refresh this. Yeah, users, and then we should have a user 1 with some test data. Great, so now we have a way to store a document. Let's create a function to update a document. So I'm going to create a function here called update doc. And it's also going to take path and data, and it's pretty much going to do this whole thing. So we can actually just cut this out and make a function called I don't know, get doc, and it can take a path, and let's define that function here. Define get doc, it takes a path, and it return Firestore doc, get Firestore. That's cool. So this can just be neatened up a bit. And we can run pretty much the same thing, except with the function here we're going to call is update doc. So now we can copy this and run update doc users, and then let's make this data 2. Let's run this. We get null back. I think they're on the right thing. Let's evaluate everything. Evaluate get this, get doc, store doc. Okay, everything's evaluated. Let's try again. Cool. There was a problem with the evaluation. Now if we go to our Firestore app, cool. We've updated our document. Now we just need a way to retrieve that document. So I'm going to create a function here called fetch doc, and it's just going to take a path. We don't need to pass data. And here we'll run Firestore get doc, get the path. And then what I want to do is actually want to be able to run a function after we fetch the document. So I'm just going to pass through a function here called like on success, and then I want to call after this promise is resolved, I want to then handle the return value. So we can use promiser for that. So let's import promiser as p. Evaluate this. Oh, it's actually promiser.call as p. Let's evaluate this. And if we go down, then what we can do after we fetch this document is we can run p then, and then we can pass through a function to handle the success result. So function, and what we will get here is a document, but I want the document to, instead of being handled, it's going to be a JavaScript object. I want it to be closurized. So what I'm going to do is transform this document to a ClojureScript map, and then pass that new map to the onSuccess handler. So we can create a let binding and get data here, and we'll convert JavaScript to CLJ, and we'll get the data off of this document because that's where the data is going to be. And then I want to set keywordize keys to true, and this will change string keys to closure keys, so we can handle it like we can use the keyword functions. And now what I want to run is on success with the data we passed through. Oh, don't know why this isn't, there we go. Evaluate this, and now what we can run is like fetch doc, and we want to fetch users 1, and let's just pass through a function which prints what we get out of it. So we can run print line with the value returned. Let's run this. And if we go to our console here, we should see something. Nope. Let's evaluate this function and run this. Yeah, okay, we're getting it. It's fetching the data and we're seeing it in our console. So now we can fetch data from Firebase and use it. So let's, instead of using users 1, let's create a store with our user's UID, and we'll create the food instead of the test keyword and data, we'll create the food list there. So what I want to do is, I want to just, when we initialize this app with a user, I'm going to create a store. And if that store is already created, then nothing will happen. Otherwise, it will create it. So install user. If there is a user here, then what I want to do is I want to create a document that we can start working with that user. What I'm going to do is we're going to check when there is a user to store, run store doc, this store doc, and the path will be the string users / and then I want to use this UID, so we can get the UID from the user, and we just want to store like a blank document. And we need to import the store doc from our database, so we're going to import this namespace into init, and I'm just going to refer to that store doc function. Cool, so when we store our user and the user exists, we're going to just make sure that this document exists so we can just update it while using our app. So if we refresh this and go to our Firebase store, we should see a new document added here. And we don't because we're not logged in. So let's log in. Okay, and we see an error. Invalid document, references must have an even number of segments, but users has one. So let's see what happened. Let's see what this user path evaluates to. And if we refresh this application, it should try again. And that's because we don't have a UID. And that's because I'm referring to user, not user to store. So user to store, we save this, we refresh this. Cool, now if we go back to a file store, we have a blank document. So this store doc function is actually overriding the user store inside of Firebase. So what I want to do is just check if the user already has a store. If it's nil, then we'll create one, otherwise we'll continue. So what I'm going to do here is when we have a user to store, I'm going to try fetch the user. So we'll use this get doc or fetch doc function. Fetch doc and user path. So instead of you doing this, we'll get the user path here. And I'll pass through our user. So when user to store, what we'll do is we'll fetch the doc, and that'll be our user. And we'll have a function here. Let's call it new. And if nil u, then we will, when null u, we will create a blank document. Oh, and we need the path here. So let's create a binding for this user path, and we'll call it user FB path. And then we'll fetch doc from the user FB path. Cool, this way we won't overwrite data that's stored for the user. Cool, and we also just need to use this user to store, not the user from Firebase. So, cool, let's check this out. I'm gonna add some data here. Let's refresh our application, and we should still see that data here. Fetching, yeah, it doesn't override it. Cool. So now what we can do is in our views, when we fetch a doc, we'll have our user data. And what we want to do is get our foods from user data. So we'll have let's have a food list, and that's from user data. And I want to call a function, well, I want to dispatch an event to set the foods. So we have set food input, but I want to set the whole food items array. So instead of setting food input, I'm going to say set food items. And here we'll have items, and we'll say set, we'll have food items, and that will be our items. And so if we go back here, we will set food items with our food list. So we kind of want to default this. We'll say it's either going to be there or not. And if it's not there, we'll default it to a blank array. So we can say get from user data, food list, otherwise return nothing, well, this blank vector. And then we'll dispatch that to Reframe. We'll use Reframe, dispatch function. And then the event name will be the one we just created, which is set food items. And then we'll sub foods. And then I think, what do we have in our initial database? Let's open our initial DB. And we have this blank vector. Let's keep it as blank. And let's just see that work. So let's refresh this and check we got no issues. Cool, we don't have any food items because there's nothing here. So if we just added a field called food items and set it to an array, and let's just add a food item here. Let's add apples. If we refresh this, we should see apples here. And that's because I called this food list. Set food items, and this is food items. And let's rename this. Let's just use food items instead of food list to keep it consistent. So we'll call this food items. Refresh. And now we should see something. So let's refresh this page. Come on, let's see our food item. There we go, apples. Cool, so now we're loading data from Firebase. Let's store data in Firebase. So when we add a food item, cool, we can turn on new DB. But what we can also do is push this to Firebase. So we can, inside of here, we just grab from, we'll just grab this DB namespace. We'll go back to our events and we'll include this namespace here. And let's just refer to the update doc function. And let's also refer to this, what do we call it? This user path function. Doc user path. And then what we can do is, before we return our DB, we can update our document and get the user path from our user in the database. And we can set food items to our new food list. So let's refresh this. Loading, okay. We could also just have some state here that shows that this is loading. Let's say pairs, say food, we see it here, and it should be added here. Then we refresh. Awesome, and it's loading. So we can actually, let's just add some loading state quickly. We go back to our views, DB, if we can set this to null, and we can go back to our component here, and we can say if null add foods, so we're basically still loading them. Then we can return div loading foods items. Otherwise we can return the list of food items, and let's see that in action. Loading, cool, loading food items, and we have our food items. And now we can add a new one, new item, say food, refresh, it should still be there. Cool, and that's integrating Firebase into our Reframe application. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Sorry about the confusing names, but it is what it is. code is down below. Hope you have a good one. Cheers guys. Bye.